Bram himself actually wrote an abridged version, which I thought was pretty cool.
Rick, let me tell you an interesting story. And,
Sure.
this is even something that I haven't had a chance to put in Stoker on Stoker. Although, and I'm saying this for the first time ever, in the next 2 weeks, I'm publishing through Hellbound Publishing an annotated version, the 125th anniversary annotated edition of Dracula. I put out a 125th, which I can see on your bookshelf. You have one with that cool cover. But this one is annotated, and it actually shows in grayscale, in the type font, all of the words, the 30,000 plus or minus words that Bram was asked by his publisher to extract from the original manuscript. So what I was lucky enough to use to create that was a early edition, I think a 6th printing of Dracula that my cousins, see, Bram has 2 great-grandsons still alive. They're in their late 70s, one early 80s. And they have some of the cool stuff. Some of the things they have donated to libraries, some they had sold to libraries, but they've also kept some really interesting pieces. And one of them is this 6th edition of Dracula that Bram was handed by his publisher, and they said, use this to take out 30,000 words. Now, in our day, Rick, it'd just be on your computer and you'd just go and do strike through or something.
Exactly.
Bram did exactly the same thing with the 6th edition of Dracula with a pencil.
Jeez.
So what you see is lines crossed out, whole paragraphs or sometimes pages with a square around it and an X in pencil. But when he actually got intricate and took out very specific passages, sometimes he had to add a few words to bridge to make sense of what he was taking out. And that's one of the elements of this brand new 125th anniversary annotated edition of Dracula is you see the grayscale of what was taken out. In a different font, you see the bridge words he put in. You also see references from the Dracula notes that he either put in or took out. And you also see from the typescript, the very last thing that he had in his hands that was typed up and handed to his publisher, what was either taken out or put back in at that stage as well. So it's kind of an interesting study because back to your original point, this whole sort of, quick, easy read, this whole TikTok look at life, there's more to it, obviously, back in the day. This was for the 1901 edition. And what Bram's publisher was getting at was this book has now sold well in its hardcover form, 485 some odd pages. But now we want to really get it out to mass market, much like they do today with your trade paperbacks. But what Bram was asked to do was take out anything that might be too complicated for people to understand. And so you'll see any references to Shakespeare, for instance, and there was a lot of them. Any references to sort of serious, deep sciences or anything that's very complicated, you had to take out. And I'm sure it drove Bram a little crazy because all the studying that I've done and comparing notes with other researchers, Bram loved to insert that stuff. The ideas of the day, the sciences of the day, mesmerism, spiritualism, phrenology, all this stuff. Well, a lot of that was removed for the first paperback abridged edition, just to make it a quick and easy read. Yeah.
And especially when you talk about that quite a bit in Stoker on Stoker book as well, that he essentially spent 7 years writing this book, and the amount of research that he put into this was incredible. And the fact that he never, to your knowledge at least, or anybody's knowledge, it sounds like, had even stepped into Transylvania, where the majority of the book takes place, but yet he immersed himself in the research so heavily in with that you would think that he was one of the locals, the way that he talked about that, which I thought was pretty mind-boggling.
It's telling, Rick, and now that you're in the know, having read that, And here's how I kind of sum it up for your listeners. So you've got Bram Stoker, one of 7 children. His 2 sisters were artists, not just painting and sculpting and stuff. But he's got 3 brothers, my great-grandfather being one of the scientists in the family, being medical guys. And another brother, Tom, being a career civil servant. And here is Bram, childhood illness, 7 years, an invalid, something really weird happened. We don't really know what. And he emerged from that. He emerged to then go and become what I believe is probably one of those awkward teenagers that has a fast growth spurt. But he also has an interesting time socializing, as a teenager, as he's come out of his 7-year kind of sarcophagus. And he's now got to enter life and write his exams to get into Trinity. And he does, and he passes them well, and he becomes an athlete, becomes a champion athlete, and he sort of grows into himself. But as he grows into himself, he is what I would imagine, having been a teacher, and I look at people that I have taught and coached, what's their operating system? It's like, it is iOS, this, what is it? And I think Bram was about 50-50 of this analytical, detail-oriented person who became the clerk in the Petty Sessions Legal Department, became the inspector of all clerks all over Ireland, and wrote a legal manual for all the clerks in Ireland. So that very legal, detail-oriented guy. But then there was the dreamer. There was the writer, the guy that actually drew pictures and got awards as a kid, the guy that loved the theater, the escapism of your imagination. So you've got both of those things in Bram's brain almost battling against each other for supremacy. What is he going to be when he grows up? And in an interesting way, even though he excelled at Trinity, he was the head of the Philosophical Society, the Historical, he had a master's in maths, there's that detail side.
Right.
He got the perfect job working for Henry Irving as his theater manager, because this job allowed him to combine both of these traits that I'm talking about. As a theater manager, he had to write contracts, he had to keep the ledgers, everything organized to make sure it all worked right on schedule. But he also had to manage Henry Irving, this super egomaniac, this creative guy that was always trying to be lavish. They'd work together on adapting scripts to bring out the best in Irving, the best in Ellen Terry. So it suited him just great. And on top of that, in his spare time, he gets to write. He gets to, and as you know from Stoker on Stoker, I was lucky to find Bram Stoker's Lost Journal and publish that with a fellow Canadian, Elizabeth Miller from University of Toronto. And that gave us a look into exactly the Bram Stoker I'm describing now. This guy struggling to become a writer, but also very interested in social concerns and so on as he was growing up.